Chapter 215, Interrogation. As Ray's crimson eyes glowed ever so bright, preparing for the execution, he looked through Ogun's status window once again. Then, he ceased his initial plan. It would be a waste to just kill him. Since he's an executive member, I better collect as much information from him as possible. Ray had been having suspicions about the whole thing that had gone down, so in order to satisfy his curiosity, he decided to use the barbarian before him. Doing so wouldn't be difficult at all. The moment he sent a pulse of energy to Ogun, the man's will was no longer his own. He was reduced to nothing but Ray's slave. I have a few questions. Answer me as honestly and as accurately as possible. Understood. As Ray's voice echoed among the pile of flesh and blood, the barbarian slowly nodded with his blank face as he opened his lips to speak. Yes. I understand. The first question Ray wanted to ask was the most pertinent one at the moment. Why did you attack us? Did Scylla hire you? Did the 3 obsidian counselors on her side hire you? Ogun shook his head to all of these questions. We were not hired by anyone. Our leader decided that we side with Lady Scylla and her new order. Ray ensured he used sound magic to broadcast everything Ogun was confessing so that the 10 witnesses could hear him loud and clear. I see. Is it just your leader, or all of you? The words of the leader are the words of the gang. The mercenary gang follows his wishes. Ray nodded as he placed his hand on his mask's chin. It's as I suspected from the very start. The mercenary gang can't be trusted. Perhaps it was because he wasn't too involved in matters relating to the criminal world. So the biases associated with certain principles didn't shackle his thought process the same way they did to people like Rebel Blanc. He already suspected the possibility of the mercenary gang interfering in this conflict. Still, Ray's knowledge was limited to mere guesses. For him to truly have something to work with, he needed more information. Why did your leader decide to join them? Did he tell you? Why else? The benefits far outweigh the alternative. Those were his exact words. As Ray listened and mulled on Ogun's words, only one thing kept ringing in his mind. It was a grim reality that he had to address. Rebel mentioned the reasons why the mercenary gang never chose a side, since it would be bad for business in the long run. However, there was an exception to the rule, a certain situation where their alliance with a side wouldn't result in any detriment at all. The absolute annihilation of the other side. If the mercenary gang chose the winning team, and the losing side was to be absolutely removed from the map, there would be no bad blood. Sure, there would be less customers, but their influence would rise, and they'll get to plunder the resources of the losing team. The mercenary gang could even take over their territories. They certainly have enough power and influence to do that. As Ray looked at Ogun's blank face, he couldn't help but sigh in both worry and disappointment. Right now, Rebel's plans will have to be slightly tweaked, or else everything will crumble. Ray took a good look at the trembling caravan members, as well as the unconscious Yuri, and shook his head slightly. This is why I didn't want us to play it too safe. While the enemy is making big moves, we're taking measured steps. The only reason he didn't interfere any further into the plan was due to his inexperience in the black market, as well as his place in the hierarchy. If things get too dire, maybe I'll say or do something. For now, though, he only intended to relay the information he got to Rebel and see what the man would do about it. Okay. A few more questions, and I think we're done here. Tell me more about your... Right as Ray was about to ask his question, his extraordinary senses, which had already imbued in it, warned him of something. Don't tell me. Ray swiftly teleported away from Ogun, using his barrier to cover the man. The ebony Ogun suddenly began to expand, as if suddenly bloated. Like a balloon, he grew massive in size, every part of his body growing at an astronomical rate. Tears fell from his eyes, followed by streams of blood. The same thing happened with his mouth, nostrils, and ears. Help me, were the last words he uttered before meeting an inevitable end. Boom. The same way a balloon would pop after reaching its limits, the bag of meat and bones exploded. Blood and gore splashed all over the interior of Ray's barrier, preventing any of the bloody flesh and thick blood from flying around. Ogun died on the spot, his form unrecognizable from how it had been in the past. He was killed remotely, huh? Is it because he answered my questions? Was it automatic, or did someone activate it after knowing he revealed secrets? Ray had many questions, but it seemed he wouldn't be getting any here. He looked at his status window, and just as he expected, the numbers he accrued from killing 100 people had been added to his stats. Looks like I won't be getting anything for Ogun's death. After all, he didn't kill with his own power. It's a shame, but at the very least, it looks like I've leveled up. Right there and then, Ray had successfully broken into level 100. It's about time. Name Ray Skylar. Race human. Class anomaly. Level 100. Life force, 82. Monolevel, 199. Combat ability, 140. Stat points, 4. Skills. Alignment neutral good. You are an irregularity to the world. Achieving the unbelievable, shaking the balance of reality. You seek to overturn what is and isn't. Will you succeed? Or will your failure be miserable? Asterisk. Chapter 216, Dire Straits. Ugh. Yuri slurred as she woke up, her body perfectly healthy despite remembering how badly she was wounded right before she passed out. As she blinked several times, ensuring her blurry vision returned to normal, she noticed the 10 people that stood around her. Miss Yuri. You're awake. He said you'd be fine, but I'm happy to see you well. Miss Yuri. Yuri's blurry vision soon returned to normal, so she was able to see the concerned expressions of the caravan members. They're all safe. I'm also perfectly fine. Sir Relix must have helped. That was the only rational conclusion she could get to. She slowly rose from the ground and looked around her. They were all within a considerably large golden dome, big enough for them to move freely inside. Sir Relix must have erected this. Her thoughts naturally trailed. She could also see the merchandise safely placed in a corner within the barrier around them, and beyond it, she could see the charred surfaces of Earth. What happened here? Yuri found herself whispering. Sir Relix happened. He killed all of them in the blink of an eye and burned their corpses. Yes. I don't think I've ever seen a man so powerful and brutal. As more people vividly described what happened to Yuri, she couldn't help but remember how foolish she had been to think he was soft in the past. Back then, he had refused to kill anyone, so he considered him too merciful. But now, upon hearing just how he went about business, Yuri was more than impressed. She was amazed. So, where is Sir Relix now? She asked, looking around her once again, but not seeing him anywhere. He said he'd be back soon, that he's off to check a warehouse, per his agreement with Lord Blanc. I see. Yuri knew the warehouse Relix went to. It was the place that they kept the enchanted items they were going to sell to the elves. I trust Sir Relix, so I'll leave everything in his hands. Yuri heaved a sigh and looked at her comrades with a gentle smile. I'm glad you are all fine. In response, they all burst with the same sentiment, some hugging her with intense emotion. It seemed I worried everyone. Her smile broadened a bit more. There was no way she would ever be so careless again. For the sake of her family, she had to control her emotions and make the right choices. She couldn't afford to lose any more people. By the way, Miss Yuri, there's something you should know. As one of the couriers said this, the tone within the dome changed. Everyone stared at her with worried expressions on their faces, and the anxiety was stifling. What is it? What's going on? She had to ask, overwhelmed by both curiosity and a creeping sense of fear. The mercenary gang has sided with the enemy side, Miss Yuri. What? Her voice was loud, but that was understandable. A major portion of the plan relied on getting the aid of the mercenary gang. That's right. Sir Relix interrogated Ogun before he died and extracted the information. It seems we can no longer rely on them. This was serious news to Yuri, but she honestly had no energy to properly react to what she was hearing. She was too downcast by the news. That wasn't even all. We don't have the money to afford them anyway, so I guess we wouldn't have been able to rely on them one way or the other. This trade was supposed to help the Carrie Blanc group with some of their finances, the first of many trades to help them generate enough funds for the conflict to come. But, with the way things were now, they weren't going to get in the green anytime soon. Damn it. Looks like it's back to the drawing board. She gritted her teeth in frustration. She could only pray that Lord Rebel Blanc and Lord Asher had a backup plan. Right now, we're in a very dangerous position. The only reason they were afloat was Relix and his support. If he was not an ally, things would have been much worse. I don't even want to imagine how they would be if he was our enemy. These thoughts were enough to assure Yuri that things weren't that bad. They were currently operating within the best-case scenario. We just need some luck. As she stared above, her gaze fixed on the night sky above, she smiled sadly. Please return safely, Sir Relix. So this is the place. It barely took Ray 30 minutes to arrive at his designation despite it being cities away from his previous position. Sure, they had been traveling eastward, but not so far east. On his way, he had seen so many settlements including developing towns and small villages, but his speed made all of them appear like blurs. Ray didn't know how many miles he had traversed, but with his, coupled with a few buffs, he was sure he had covered a lot of grounds. I memorized the map well, and since Rebel was detailed with his description, it wasn't too hard to find. Right now, he was floating right above what appeared to be considerably large mountains. But I know that they aren't mountains. This entire place was a warehouse, connected through several underground paths which led from one mountain to another. The Carrie Blanc shore is resourceful. Ray could see about 10 mountains clustered together, so he knew he was in the right place. Just how massive is this warehouse for all of them to be filled with enchanted items for the elves? There was only one way to find out, and Ray was about to begin his descent. I haven't forgotten about our deal, Rebel. However, since this is a remote area and there seems to be a lot of flaws in your plan, I think I'll help you out just a little. Ray smiled as his eyes flickered with dark purple. I might need to be a bit extreme in my measures. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. What sort of plan does Ray have? Anyone want to guess? Chapter 217, It's a Dragon. The Carrie Blanc Eastern Warehouse. It existed beyond the standard definitions of a warehouse, instead taking on a completely different form. 10 snow-capped mountains clustered together, with secret entrances spread all around them, as well as passageways locked underneath the earth that led to one another. It was a labyrinthine path ensured no outsider could ever comprehend the complicated activities that went on within it. Inside this mountain, which had been drilled so that caves and caverns could be used to safely store valuable resources that were to be distributed to multiple areas within the eastern region. However, this was merely one function of the warehouse. Only half of it was used for storage, while the second half was used for production. The products made within the eastern warehouse included many things, but due to the recent business with the elves, they mostly consisted of enchanted items necessary for warfare. Living quarters existed in both sections of the mountains, specifically for the workers there. As a result, the warehouse was self-sustaining, and more importantly, it was safe. Until now. It's a dragoon. Screeches filled the chambers of the warehouse as the very interior rumbled as a result of whatever was happening outside. Just a minute ago, they were busy with their activities, but once the alarms rang from the watchtowers, and they realized what had come, everyone ceased their activities. This was no time to work. It was time to run. A dragon is here. Screams filled the air as grown men and women cried like babies. They trembled as they tried to find their way out of whatever center they were assigned to. Run. Echoes of desperation filled the entire warehouse, and before long there was a stampede. Even those who had time off, or were resting in their rooms, heard the noises and jumped to their feet. There was only one thing on everyone's mind. Survival. Boom. More volleys of what they presumed to be dragon breath caused portions of the ceiling to collapse. Thankfully, no one suffered fatal injuries. They all took the emergency escape tunnels and fled for their lives, leaving behind whatever they could. No one dared go outside. They would take the hidden tunnels and journey through them for at least a mile before exiting through a cave that was considerably far from the warehouse. At the very least, they would be able to preserve their lives that way. With everyone in a frenzy, no one dared to even think of coming back or fighting back. In the presence of a dragon, there was nothing anyone could do. Fu-wa. A yawn echoed from an extremely handsome man as he rose from his bed. He was being tapped by two young maidens who shared his bed and sat at both his left and right. He raised his brow as he noticed the distraught look on their faces as their naked bodies greeted his sight. What's going on? The looked around his grand room, a place fit for a king, and noticed that many things in it were vibrating. I can hear shouts and screams too. He had been feeling tremors and hearing noises, but he simply thought he was dreaming. However, now that he was awake, it seemed the commotion wouldn't die down. Would you just shut up? He grumbled as he itched his head. His long black hair fell on his shoulders and scattered all over his face, and he stroked his bald chin gently. As his sharp black eyes fell on the maiden beside him, he slowly opened his lips and asked his question. Why did you wake me up from my sleep? Haven't I told you that I don't like being disturbed? Well, sir. The naked girl backed away, her hands trembling as she pulled them back. Her moist eyes were filled with fear, and her face was pale with fear. The reason was simple. The man before her was one of the 9 heads of destruction, and he had been placed as a guard of this place. He had 2 personal rules when it came to his affairs. 1. No woman he called in was allowed to leave his presence unless he said so. 2. No one was to wake him up when he was asleep. Any who broke these 2 rules had to die. Sploosh. Blood sprayed from the young lady's head as her head practically exploded. Argh. A scream came from the lips of the second one as she watched splatters of blood rush from the gaping neck of her friend. Why? Why did she have to die such a brutal death? It wasn't their fault that this pervert of a man summoned them to his room and had his fun with them through the night. They wouldn't even have dared to wake him up, but they had no choice. Lord Phobia. We had no. Too loud. Spluosch. The destruction of the other girl's head caused the ringing in the handsome young man's ears to stop, and he smiled in satisfaction once it happened. The blood that splattered from both girls were not floating in the air, like liquid bubbles in the air. Not a single drop had splashed on his body. Instead, more began to rise from the necks of the women until they became nothing but dried-up corpses. All the blood gathered together to form one large sphere of blood. Haa. Finally some quiet. He whispered, ignoring the sphere that was floating next to him. So, what exactly happened? What's causing the commotion? Unfortunately, there was no one in the room to answer him. TCH. Why did I kill them? Am I still asleep, or? Lord Phobio, as he was called, rose from his bed with a lazy groan. He was naked, so his lean, but well-toned body was exposed in all its majesty. He put on a white robe and a pair of sandals, leaving his bedroom for the living room. As he did so, the sphere of blood followed him. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Guess this is like a marathon or something. We're going to see another mercenary gang head flex his power. Sorry for all the info dump. Chapter 218, The Great Lord Phobia. Phobio arrived in the parlor, a glamorously furnished place that made him nothing short of a nobleman. No one would ever expect such a room like this to exist deep within the mountains. And yet, let's find out what happened, shall we? As he muttered this, he went to a corner of the room where a mirror was hung on the wall. He took a minute or two to observe his handsome face and his perfect body. He was extremely gorgeous, and even his tool down there was too large to be true. Many women had testified to this. It was only after checking himself out a couple of times that Phobio reminded himself that he had come to the mirror for an important purpose. Besides checking out his body, of course. Show me what's going on outside. As Phobio said this, the mirror stopped reflecting him, instead displaying the havoc that was ensuing within the warehouse. They're all fleeing, Interesting. There were a couple thousand workers that lived and worked in the Carrie Blanc Eastern warehouse, and this was the count after he had executed a few hundred to serve as examples to the rest. After taking control of this place, the rules were pretty simple. The workers would work in exchange for their lives. They weren't getting paid, at least, not in cash. Still, that didn't mean they could do shoddy work or desert their work posts. Looks like I'll have to teach them a lesson. He placed a hand on the mirror and muttered a few words. Activate the emergency trap. The moment he said this, the mirror glowed bright crimson, and what soon followed were screams of chaos and death. When he took over, he with the help of a colleague installed arrows more than 3 times the total number of workers within the warehouse. He placed them on the ceiling of the path that led to the other end of the emergency exit, that is, the emergency tunnels. Each arrow was poisoned, so normal people who served as workers didn't stand a chance even if they were grazed by one. As a result, a massacre ensued. How dare they try to desert their workplace? He whispered, smiling as he could see pretty much all of the workers dead. All those thousands of lives extinguished. I'll have to get new workers. Well, it shouldn't be a problem. Right? Frankly speaking, Phobio didn't care. He would just do what he wanted to do, the same as he had always done. The very reason he joined the mercenary gang was for that purpose, and he knew just how valuable he was to them, so it wasn't like they could reprimand him too much. Who else among them had a skill they could manipulate blood? A skill as rare as spatial magic or gravity manipulation. The only reason he wasn't among the deadly three was because he simply didn't care for it. Being recognized as the strongest within the mercenary gang meant more responsibility, and Fobio didn't care for any of that at the moment. Fobio simply wanted to drink, sleep, have fun with women, and jerk himself off as he stared at his reflection. Perhaps there were other things he would desire in the future, but for now, he didn't really want much else. I never found out the source of the commotion. From what he could see from the mirror, it seemed all the workers were dead, but Fobio suspected that a few could still be alive. Maybe some won't die immediately from the poison. I'll just extract information from them before I eliminate them. Fobio wasn't sure if they would be honest with him if he didn't offer an incentive, so he decided to lie that he would save them if they told him what he wanted to know. A good plan. Now then. Let's go. Fobio's soft white robe danced as his flip-flop squeaked on the ground. He only came to a halt once he reached the pool of blood that littered his sight. The blood on the ground slowly began to gravitate towards him, and into the sphere that stood beside him. All of it was drained from the ground and sucked into the crimson orb. As a result, only lifeless husks with pale skin littered his sight. They're all dead. Fobio murmured, slapping his hand on his face. As he stared at the emaciated corpses, an expression of disgust appeared on his face. Why couldn't one of you just hang on until I came? Bunch of useless weaklings. They weren't like him at all. Lord Fobio was special, even from the moment he was born. Looks like I'll have to investigate Mij. How unexpected. A voice suddenly echoed within the massive clearing that Fobio stood in, forcing him to cease his words. He could feel a prickling sensation behind him, so he quickly turned and looked in the direction of the only other living entity in the room. His gaze met someone who wore a black hooded cape, with red designs on the fur portions of it. He had a black coat on as well, with a black mask hiding his face. To think there was still someone left. The masked individual said, taking a step forward. Who the hell are you? Fobio asked, his loud voice filled with annoyance. I didn't even notice his presence until he spoke. He's not normal. Fobio narrowed his gaze instantly. The masked fellow certainly wasn't as special as he was, but he was formidable. He had to admit that much. Drained corpses? Did you kill all those people? The masked man asked, pointing at the dead bodies of the dead Carrie Blanc Group employees. Pretty much. But you've not answered my question yet. Fobio was ready to strike down the man in front of him if he ignored his question again. He was already being generous by forgiving his impudence once. Who am I? Well, that changes depending on who you ask. But, I guess for this event's purposes, I am a dragon. The moment the masked man said this, his eyes glowed purple, and an indescribable aura filled the air. Fobio couldn't deny it even if he tried. This man is a dragon. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Let's see how far Ray goes with his shenanigans. Chapter 219, Fobio vs Dragon. Lord Fobio, the Crimson Angel. That was what his name within the mercenary gang, though some would argue that his true nature resembled a devil more than an angel. He had a beautifully crafted face, and his body was toned to perfection. As he stood there, watching the dragon announce itself, he couldn't help but leak out a wry grin. Kikik. You're a dragon, huh? His lips slowly curled up, revealing a twisted grin that handsome men shouldn't have. Fobio looked like a snake at that point, his entire demeanor contorted to form an ugly mask of amusement. So what? So what if you're a dragon? He asked, his body suddenly relaxing as he kept up his cackles. Aren't you supposed to be frightened or something? Nope. Why would I be? Fobio feared no one. That had been the case since he was little. His special ability made it so that he was always very strong. In fact, he was the one who was always feared by those around him. Also, I've killed a dragon before, so it's no big deal. It seems you came here to attack us, so I'll just kill you too. The way Fobio spoke was with confidence and finesse. Even though he wasn't wearing a lot of enchanted items, he still had the confidence to win. His white robe and dark brown sandals were the only two items he had on, and they were far from his usual set. Still, he was confident. The blood I've amassed from thousands of people should be enough for this guy. Particles of mana was trapped in the blood of people, so if he collected their blood, he was collating a lot of mana in the process. Not only would the energy add impact to his spells, but it wouldn't consume too much energy on his part. He could keep going on and on. I see. I'm curious, though, what kind of dragon did you defeat? The dragon asked. He seemed to be scoffing at Fobio, as if disbelieving his words. How would I remember the kind of dragon? I don't care to remember such things. Fobio wasn't lying. He didn't care enough to recollect the kinds of enemies he had faced, especially if they lost. The defeated had no value in his eyes. You probably fought a weak dragon. I'm a strong one, you know. Veins appeared all over Fobio's head the moment he heard this. He had never felt so insulted in all his life. What the hell are you trying to say? He growled, the sphere of blood beside him already bubbling with energy. What would happen next depends on the next word given by the humanoid dragon. Haha. Sorry. It seems your brain can't comprehend what I'm telling you, so why don't I break it down for you? As the dragon spoke, he stretched a hand towards Fobio, gesturing for a moment. I'm telling you, it'll be okay for me. After all, you're weak. Fobio's wide eyes took in the dragon's humanoid form as he heard those words. His eyes that were littered in darkness suddenly began to have a red glow to them. Did you just call me weak? His long black hair began to rise, and an incredibly dense layer of mana erupted from within him. The amount of energy generated caused distortion in the air, but Fobio cared for nothing like that. He simply wanted to show the ignorant dragon in front of him who was boss. Those two fools must have known it was a dragon, which is why they woke me up. They couldn't leave his side since he had instructed them not to, so they resorted to the least severe option, and for good reason. Those two knew I could beat the dragon, which is why they fervently stayed by my side rather than run off. Fobio's thoughts echoed deep within him, so he couldn't help but smile internally. I understand now. Those girls. They should have explained or said something quickly. Fobio thought it was a shame to see them die. Well, they brought it upon themselves. Just like this fool here. The masked dragon stood still, watching as Fobio's mana undulated. It almost seemed like the thing wasn't even fazed by the power being released. You can't fool me. The man gritted his teeth as he activated his three other skills. Each of these skills had their benefits, and by using them at once alongside his he was pretty much invincible. I'm not with any of my standard items. But, I can compensate for that weakness with this amount of blood. It's not most times I get to have something like this. Even though this was the coalition of blood from vermin, it still had its uses. Oi, dragon. Phobio's enraged eyes glowed a different shade of red compared to the dragon. Get ready to die. Oka. Whoosh. Like a ghost, Phobio instantly appeared behind the dragon, a blade already in his grasp. After using a buff that raised his physical abilities to the very limits, Phobio had no problem quickly making a sharp and long blade out of blood. His crimson weapon was going to be dyed in blood as soon as he slashed the bare back of his enemy. His was going to be useless in this fight, now that Phobio thought of it. The enemy will perish. Right here and now. Had told him that attacking his opponent's back was the best move at the moment, and he followed suit instantly. As for, it caused his opponent to feel a paralyzing sensation that prevented them from reacting properly to his attacks. Some targets, who had weaker mental states, would even see illusions of them dying before they experienced actual death. Phobio had combined all of these skills in order to deal a decisive strike. He could ask all the questions later. Whoosh. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Sorry for the info dumps, but I just had to let you know how strong this character is. Who do you think would win between him and Ogun? Chapter 220, Phobio vs Dragon. Whoosh. The vertical strike was smooth and straightforward. It was bound to slice through his opponent from head to toe, shattering his skull and rending every organ he had inside. It would be like a hot knife running through butter. The attack descended. Then. Clang. As soon as the blood sword reached the dragon's head, a loud noise filled the room. Almost as if the blade had hit an unbreakable wall. Phobio took a few steps back in recoil as his brain tried to process the whole thing. Huh? What just happened? Before he could complete his line of thoughts, the blade that he now held in his trembling hand shattered before his very eyes and scattered about like glass. What? The glass-like components of the blade turned into blood and soon returned to the orb that hovered beside Phobio. As long as he was still alive, and there was still blood, it would gather around him. That was a special privilege of his class. However, Phobio wasn't concerned about any benefits or class at the moment. Only one thing filled his mind. How did this guy shatter my blade? The blade was made of concentrated blood, the kind that had the combined fluid of hundreds of people. I don't see any armor or skill being used. Is he just that durable? Dragons were famed to be the strongest in H-Tray, so it was a given that they would have tough skins. That was precisely why Phobio went for a dense weapon. To think even that wasn't enough to do any damage. Phobio's eased facade slowly began to crumble. My turn. He suddenly heard a voice from the dragon in front of him. It scared him to his bones. The thing closed the distance between them in a flash, sending his hand flying towards Phobio in a rush. Look. Phobio couldn't react on time, so he covered his face while stepping back. He looked like a pitiful coward, and the approaching fist would have bashed his head at that very moment. However, boom! His second-class privilege came in handy. A dense shield made up of blood now manifested before him, defending him from the fiend that would have surely blown off his head. Guh! The shock waves generated by the attack was enough to cause Phobio to stagger a few steps back as his widened eyes watched as his shield broke apart in horror. "I'm not done." The dragon's voice echoed past the crumbling blood as he rushed towards Phobio again. "TCH. I gotta evade." The young man ducked to his side, barely avoiding the impact that caused the very ground to shatter apart. The dragon fluidly rushed to his location, but he used his actively nimble body to avoid the slew of attacks he was receiving. His long black hair danced as he avoided death-causing hits. However, there was only so much luck a man could receive. Whoosh! The dragon appeared right as Phobio moved to a new position, almost as if he had already known he would retreat there. What happened there was no one's surprise. Boom! The punch carried so much weight that Phobio felt his body shooting him signals of instant pain as he was sent flying to the closest wall behind him. The very thing cracked as Phobio's body dug a hole in it. Pook! Blood spurted out of his lips as he helplessly remained hanging in the wall. The bloody mess on his chest also stood out. "Do you understand now? Why I said you're weak?" As the dragon's voice echoed in Phobio's ears, he could feel something heat up within him. It was rising from his depths. "You." Phobio's bulging eyes were fixated on the dragon as he had this thought. "You dare hit me?" As his voice echoed in the vast expanse, all the blood that had been gathered slowly began to rush towards him. "You dare." As soon as the sphere touched Phobio, the crimson liquid exploded into a river of blood. The river coalesced to form something massive, with Phobio in the center. The ceiling trembled, and the ground cracked as the thing that was forming had too much mass and power to be contained within the area. "Looks like this place is too cramped. Let's take this outside," the dragon suggested. Before Phobio could say a single word, the being flew high into the ceiling, creating a path for itself as debris flew everywhere. "Wait! Come back here!" Phobio roared in rage as he saw his prey leave. His bloodshot eyes made it clear that he wouldn't rest until he ended the beast's life. His massive crimson construct was pretty much done, so he rose to the surface in a blur as well. In a rush of crimson, he ascended to meet his prey. And in no time at all, he was outside the safe region of the Warehouse Mountains. That was when he saw the true reason his subordinates had been fleeing all this time. What is all this? The darkness could not cover what he was witnessing. Several layers of destruction were finally displayed all around the mountains, with some even on them. Considerable damage had been done to the nearby areas, and from the chaos he was witnessing, Phobio was convinced the dragon he was facing was the real deal. Would I have been able to replicate this? He asked himself, watching the sheer scale of destruction. No, I can't think that way. Just because the dragon had superior firepower, it didn't mean he wouldn't win. Every beast had a weakness, after all. Did you like my redecoration? The dragon appeared in front of Phobio, as if it had always been there. The mask was still on, and his dark cloak danced with the cool breeze. You. Initially, Phobio wanted to kill the dragon just because, and also because it was a threat to his group. But now, this was personal. In his current form, it was indeed very possible, so Fobio felt no need to hold himself back any longer. He had to end this. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Ends the fight, don't worry. Chapter 221, Fobio vs Dragon. A creature of red. It had crimson wings, as well as scarlet armor that covered its entire body. It somehow resembled a woman who could pass as a battle-hardened warrior at any time, with long hair made from hardened blood, and an irresistible face dyed in red. It stood at about 15 meters, a colossal entity by all means. The blood construct had a blade on both hands, appearing pristine and battle-ready at the same time. This was Fobio's ultimate technique, Crimson Valkyrie. The very reason why he was granted the nickname the Crimson Angel was precisely due to this form of his. The Valkyrie was not a living construct, but merely a golem-like entity that responded to Fobio's whims and commands. The thing looked at the target, just as Fobio did from within its thick armor. There was a mirror similar to the one he had in his room, so he was able to perfectly observe what was going on without exposing himself. He was simply going to be content watching his foe turn into nothing but flesh paste right in front of his eyes. There would be nothing more satisfying. I see. So we're going with an epic final boss CGI battle, huh? He heard the dragon say from his distance. Fobio didn't understand what CGI meant. He just wanted his enemy out of his sight. I guess I'll show you my true form. Fobio's tense body quivered a little, but he stood his ground. Relax, Fobio. So what if transforms? It's not like you haven't faced a dragon before. With so much blood at his disposal, he was currently at an advantage. There was no possibility of failure. Then. Once the dragon's true form emerged, Fobio wasn't so sure anymore. The being was massive, perhaps more massive than the Crimson Valkyrie, and its monstrous form sent terror flowing through even Fobio's body. It had 3 twisted horns, and its scaly body gleamed with ominous power. Its bluish-purple eyes glowed with horror, and misty breath proceeded from its dragon-like jaw. Of course, it had wings to keep it afloat, and its tail danced as it floated. As both colossal entities stared each other down, Fobio didn't know when he took a huge gulp of saliva. He could feel a part of his body shaking. No. No. He didn't want to accept it. That thing isn't stronger than me. It's not stronger than my trump card. He could never accept it. I'll destroy it right here and now. And so Fobio gave his bloody construct one simple instruction. Crimson Valkyrie. Kill that dragon. I see. So that's his trump card. As Ray's dragon eyes took in the opponent he had to face, he nearly gave a sigh. It's pretty strong and durable, but not a threat. Ray also had the same thoughts about Fobio. I can't believe he is also one of the leaders of the mercenary gang. His stats were even lesser than Ogun's, but it seemed he made up for it when it came to skill. Blood magic, huh? This is the first time I've seen something like this. Of course, he copied all the guy's abilities, and he was partially curious about whether or not he could control Phobio's construct. But now isn't the time. I've messed around for too long, so I should probably wrap things up. After all, there was no point playing around again. The original plan was to scare everyone away by pretending to be a dragon and helping Rebel recover the warehouse. It was supposed to be that simple. But this idiot went and killed everyone I was trying to save. It pissed Ray off, but he managed to swallow his dissatisfaction. Now that the original plan has been compromised, there's no witness to tell the superiors what I want them to think happened. If the survivors had fled, the mercenary gang would be able to confirm that this was the work of a dragon not in any way connected to Carrie Blanc and the other groups. That way, no war would start. In fact, the opposite might happen. They might become very wary and be on the defensive for a while. Doing that would give the Carrie Blanc group more room to breathe and time to figure things out. The issue now is that they're all dead. Which means, yup, there was no other choice. I'll have to make him my sole survivor somehow. To Ray, that meant aiming for non-lethal spots and incapacitating the Crimson Valkyrie. Shouldn't be too hard. He could see the enemy already brandishing their blade, getting ready to attack, so Ray prepared himself as well. He was already much faster than Phobio, but he couldn't be certain about the Crimson Valkyrie. Whoosh! The thing rushed to Ray to deal the first strike, but he easily evaded it. It seems I'm still just as fast and agile as I am in my normal form. The issue was his size. He still wasn't completely used to it, but that didn't mean he couldn't avoid the entire strikes completely. Swish. Fwish. Wish. The crimson blades of the Crimson Valkyrie danced in the air as Ray dodged everything. After a few more strikes, he was finally able to detect where his opponent was. The chest region, huh? With it already figured out, as well as his enemy being much weaker than he was, Ray figured it was the best time to finish things. With this single thought echoing in his mind, Ray opened his dragon mouth and released the pent-up energy locked within. Boom! The instant the dark breath touched the hardened blood, the latter could not stand it and instantly vaporized. Ray aimed for the head, so the Crimson Valkyrie was now headless. However, since that was only for decoration, the thing attacked again, this time trying to use its two blades to slice her down. This time, Ray held both of the Valkyrie's hands with his large dragon-like ones, easily stopping them in their tracks. And then, squelch. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Damn it. Looks like I was wrong. We have one more to go, it seems. Chapter 222, The Dragon's Victory. Blood sprayed out of the Crimson Valkyrie's two arms as Ray ripped them out in an instant. Without both hands and a head, the colossal thing was pretty much done for. He used on the blood-red hands so they would never return to the blood user. If it wanted to regenerate its body, then there were two options. Spread out the condensed blood and lose durability, or reduce the mass and maintain it. Unsurprisingly, the opponent chose the latter option. Blood gathered in the damaged regions as the Valkyrie flew a considerable distance from Dragon Ray. The Crimson Valkyrie was now about 11 or so meters tall, with its body seemingly as good as new. "You beast!" He heard Phobio's voice echo from within the massive thing. "I'll kill you. I've killed dragons before." Ray sighed and shook his head. "I'm sure now. These guys haven't killed any strong dragons. Their stats were nice, but a joke compared to a dragon commander's. And I'm stronger than a dragon commander, so." There was no need to even respond, so Ray simply waited for the Valkyrie to attack before he finished it off. The colossal thing stood at a distance, instead forming several projectiles from blood. "Yeah. Sure. That would only reduce your size." "Go ahead, though." Ray nearly rolled his eyes when he saw this. Phobio had to have figured out how useless it was to attack him in close range. So he chose a long-range battle. For Ray, though, they were one and the same. Whoosh. Like several arrows cutting through the wind to reach their targets, so too did the blood spikes rush in Ray's direction. However, by merely activating, the moment the blood touched the barrier around him, it vaporized. Every spike was reduced to dust. Shat. Before the fool behind his 10-meter crimson avatar could say any more, Ray had closed the distance between himself and the crimson entity. He could have used spatial magic, but merely relying on his speed was more than enough. The moment he became a blur and appeared before a Phobio, the man tried to make his Valkyrie do the work for him. However, 4 blades appeared out of nowhere, thanks to Ray's, and cut through the Valkyrie's 4 limbs. Once again, the being before him was subjugated so easily. Too easily. Ray, of course, ensured to disintegrate all the blood he laid eyes. Screams appeared from within the Valkyrie, as if it was Phobio's limbs that were cut off. "Don't be a wuss," Ray muttered, giving the Crimson Valkyrie at least, what was left of it, a good shoulder chop. Boom! The thing fell to the ground at an abnormal rate and shattered the earth the moment it landed. Right as it tried to get up, Ray descended from his heights and stepped on it. Boom! As more echoes of destruction radiated all around, blasts of the ensuing conflict filled the air. More blood was stripped from the once mighty construct, and its inadequate power lessened every time. In no time at all. It was no longer a mighty ring of unparalleled power. It was merely Phobio donning the crimson armor as if he wore a certain kind of exoskeleton suit. He looks so cheesy, Ray thought to himself as he cracked a smile. Phobio saw this and had a frustrated look on his face. Despite how badly he had lost, the fool simply failed to accept it. "Why you?" He stepped forward, approaching Ray's 15-meter-plus dragon form. "I'm not scared of why." Before Phobio could complete his statement, Ray did a finger flick. Instantly, the pressure shattered the final shred of armor that shrouded him, as well as the robe and sandals that he previously wore. It was a miracle that his skin was still hanging tight to his body after everything was ripped off by Ray's pressure. AAHH. Ray felt awkward seeing his enemy, a grown man, naked. He would have covered his eyes, but that wasn't a very smart choice on a battlefield. As a result, he kept his eyes peeled. This is probably the perfect time to turn back. How? Phobio was barely standing on the ground, his legs too tired, as well as frightened to move a single inch. He was sweating all over, and his so-called perfect body was filled with the salty, smelly odor of his liquid. A trace of ammonia could be found if one took a whiff close to him. How could I have lost? He was so sure he could defeat this opponent. Hadn't he beaten dragons before? Why was this one any different? Why? Why was this dragon so strong? As his naked body shivered in the cold, Fobio couldn't take it anymore. He had to know. Why are you so? Shut up. The moment he heard this, Fobio didn't know why he suddenly stopped speaking. The dragon swiftly transformed into a human, and in a flash, he was right in front of him. Kneel. A sudden echo surged within Fobio's brain, and he suddenly found himself on the ground. Bow. Fobio's trembling body ate the dirt as he prostrated himself before the overwhelming night of the Almighty. The pressure was overwhelming. You're too pathetic to even kill. The words of the dragon echoed in his ears. Fobio didn't know why he felt happy to hear that. Perhaps he simply didn't want to die. You killed every other occupant of this place, right? Fobio nodded profusely, not minding that he was bashing his head on the rock-hard ground. Then, if I spare you, will you return here? His long hair swayed as they swept up the dirt and dust around. He had become nothing but a filthy mongrel, the same kind that he usually discriminated against. Then leave my sight. I'll be taking over this territory now. As the harsh words of the dragon echoed in the air, Fobio felt a pressure lift off him. He slowly rose to his feet, trembling as he stole one final stare at the entity before him. He couldn't even look him in eye. Why yes. You understand. Fobio was miserable, bleeding, and naked. He didn't have anything with him, and the closest thing to civilization was miles off. But, at the very least, he was alive. That was all that mattered. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. By the time I'm writing this, we have just hit 1 million views, and I know it will have increased exponentially when this is published. But thanks to everyone who has been supporting this book. You all are the best. There'd be no an extras POV without you all. Chapter 223, Securing the Goods. Oh, wow. As Ray watched Fobio scamper off with his miserable naked body, he felt a bit bad for him. I thought I was average down there, but it seems there's someone who's worse off than me. Ray knew he couldn't judge a man by his equipment since it was something mostly out of one's control. Must be his genetics. Ray shrugged off his thoughts of the guy's little worm and decided to focus on the more important things. Looks like the damage wasn't too much. I doubt the goods inside would have been affected too much. He smiled. The reason Ray decided not to use any flashy attacks or destructive moves was because he didn't want too much damage done to the landscape. My initial dragon attacks were done to raise the alarm, so I had to go a bit overboard. Not that the act was over, he felt better than ever. I hope I was able to nail that arrogant and imposing dragon aesthetic. Seeing how Fobio acted in his presence, he could tell that he must have done something right. I doubt the mercenary gang members would want to face a dragon that easily defeated their executives so easily. Ray smiled. Even if they did, he doubted they'd be opportune to take action anytime soon. Their first goal will be to squash the Carrie Blanc group and the other two. That meant their hands were too full to deal with a powerful dragon. If they're stupid enough to think of fighting me, then it also works for my benefit. If he eliminated as many of the heads as possible, the military power of the opposing sides would drastically reduce. And then, it'll be our turn to counterattack. Either way, Ray could see how he was going to emerge victorious in all these things. I've reclaimed ownership of the warehouse, but I can't just leave it unmanned. Phobio had pretty much ensured no one was left. Guess I'll have to summon some monsters to handle the job. With everything pretty much taken care of, Ray decided to take a good look around the warehouse and survey everything before leaving. I should hurry, though. Everyone is waiting for me. Ray was in the final storage room, and he still couldn't believe how much stuff had been stockpiled for the trade with the elves. Easily hundreds of thousands of weapons and items. They were all high quality too, as expected of the Carrie Blanc group. I guess things must be really serious over at the elf place. Maybe I'll check it out after I'm done resolving the dungeon raid and this whole black market thing. In this world, there were other races that occupied various portions of each continent. I really need to check them all out. Since he now had spatial magic and flight, things would be much easier than for any other person. I wonder if they have something like a visa or passport process. Well, not much is known about the other races, so there's really nothing I can say. Ray dismissed his thoughts and took one final look at everything he had just saved for the Carrie Blanc group. You better keep your word and go mainstream after all this. Rebel Blanc came to his mind as he narrowed his eyes. They were definitely going to make tons of profit with so many enchanted items. It was no wonder that paid him so much money for the monster cores. Well, no use thinking about that now. He shrugged as he stretched his hand towards the piles of goods in front of him. He simply had to do what he did for the others in the rooms he just visited. The moment he whispered this, a swirling vortex of space suddenly manifested all around the room, distorting everything in sight. Reality seemed to twist as the environment itself took on a warped form. In just a few seconds, the world returned to normal and all the goods in the room had completely vanished. Great. That's the last of them. Ray chuckled to himself, returning his hand to his pocket. The skill he just used was an amalgamation of and. It allowed him to create a gateway to an alternate spatial dimension. Unlike with, though, there didn't seem to be any limit to what he could put inside this new dimension. At least, not with what he had seen. Ray also knew everything that happened in his special world, which meant he knew precisely what dwelled inside and where they were. He could also summon them whenever he wanted. By placing them all in grand inventory, they'll be safe from any harm. He smiled to himself. In an instant, Ray vanished from his position and appeared near the entrance of the warehouse. I'll just summon some monsters and leave, he murmured. By controlling them and giving them a directive to protect the place from intruders, he could at least take extra measures to ensure the other side suffered some kind of loss if they returned. Imagine them going through all that trouble, only to kill all the monsters, rush inside, and then realize there's nothing waiting for them. Ray nearly burst out laughing just thinking about it. He went on to make all the preparations and summon the monsters in no time at all. Once he reached his summon limit, he gave them their instructions and walked out the front door. Well, now that I have everything I need, I better head back before they start worrying. In a single swirl of contorted space, Ray vanished from his position. Underneath his mask, he had a wide grin on his face, and his lips moved to form a short whisper. This is becoming a lot more fun than I expected. He's finally gone. Yes. Seems he is. Two pointy-eared people with a hood covering their beautiful hair, and a mask covering their faces, looked at each other right after witnessing the dragon in obsidian black cloak teleport away from his position. Their brightly colored eyes gleamed with what could be interpreted as delight or anxiety as they nodded at each other. We need to tell Lady Aurora. She'll know what to do next. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Looks like our pointy-eared friends will soon be joining us. Chapter 224, Grim Notice. Voyage. A portal opened within the Carrie Blanc Group's official building, a place separate from the usual store. It was much larger than the store, and with its large compound occupying a considerable amount of land. Most importantly, it was on the surface. The pristine white building did not belong in such a dreary place as the black market, so its squeaky white walls and pristine compound radiated with beauty that could only be seen in the capital. To the outside world, this was simply a nobleman's property used for vacation once a year. But in actuality, it served as the warehouse of the Carrie Blanc Group within the capital. It held items in stock, and it had a secret pathway that led to the black market. Thanks to Lord Blank's connection with a few nobles, this was easily a thing he could accomplish. This was also where Rebel Blank's office was located, the same expanse where the glowing portal was opening up in. He raised his head and saw the one who had visited him so abruptly. It was none other than Relix. His intimidating presence made the older man feel a weight resting upon his shoulders, a weight far heavier than what the current state of his empire made him feel. He was a very cautious man, so he knew full well what these instincts of his told him. The man in front of him was dangerous. I'm grateful to have him on my side, but there was no way to be at ease with him. Not entirely. Relix proceeded to sit on the chair right opposite where Rebel sat. Only a pristine desk separated them. When Rebel wanted to rise to pay his proper respects and greet Relix, he was told not to bother. Don't worry. Everyone is safe, and the goods are all secure. Relix had been given a special device that allowed communication between two parties, though it consumed more mana the further away the communicators were. The last time they spoke, he had been informed of the attack, and now that Relix was in front of him all alone, Rebel had been worried for a moment. Yuri and the couriers are all back. I teleported them to the designated location before coming here. Rebel nodded in appreciation, but he felt like this was only scratching the surface. There had to be something more intricate about this visit. We need to talk, Rebel. Relix spoke, fully confirming the feelings of foreboding that had been clinging to his heart. Rebel gulped and nodded slightly. Okay, Sir Relix. Please tell me what the matter is. It only took a few minutes, but Relix was able to fully explain the situation to the Obsidian Counselor. His eyes fell as he began to make heavy sighs. I feared this possibility, but I hoped it wouldn't be the case. He whispered, his voice radiating within his dark office. It was still pretty dark outside, with most people sleeping in their homes. For Rebel, though, he couldn't sleep. Not while the very empire he struggled to build was crumbling before his very eyes. So, the mercenary gang has sided with Scylla and her new order. His tone was grave, and his voice slightly trembled. With this, it was already clear that they were nearly at checkmate. However, for some reason, the situation didn't seem as bleak as one would expect. Why? Because Sir Relix was still with them. I mentioned this before, but I faced 2 of the 9 heads. They're pretty strong, but they're nothing to fear if you have me. Rebel Blanc still found it too good to be true, but after hearing about their descriptions from Relix, he had to admit it. He really eliminated 2 of them. For the second one, it wasn't an elimination, but more like placing him out of the equation. Sir Relix is indeed very strong. I always knew it, but hearing it now. Rebel was regarded as a powerful man himself. However, even he had limits. Without his enchanted items aiding him, he would be able to stand a chance against any of the 9 heads, and even with his items, he would only be able to stand against 1 or 2. He wasn't even sure he would come out scathed. And yet, how strong are you, really? He wondered as he stared at the masked face of the man before him. You said you left your subordinates to guard the warehouse, right? Yes. They're monsters, so they won't be linked to the Carrie Blanc group at all. That's a relief. Rebel had already been informed about the strategy Relix used. The whole illusion of a dragon attacking the warehouse to cause distress. It was brilliant. It's unfortunate that so many of our employees died, though. I'll have to compensate their families. This was no time to mourn, though. There were a lot of things to be concerned about, especially with the revelation about the mercenary gang joining forces with the enemy. I suspect they'll make some kind of move on the other 2 groups besides yours. Rebel nodded at Relix's words. He also had that sneaking suspicion. Asher has already gone as a delegate to one of the councillors. He stays considerably close to the capital, a couple of small cities away. The plan was to gain the support of the groups as soon as possible, so almost as soon as Relix took off, Asher also went for his own mission. It's possible that they could try something to them, so I think you should reach out to your son. Ask him about an update. The man nodded and used his communication device, an item that resembled a runestone, to connect with the other pair with his son. However, he's not responding. There was radio silence. Rebel's face began to get moist with sweat. Has your son ever refused to respond your call under any important circumstances? Relix asked, his tone growing deeper. No. Even when Asher had reasons to, he never ignored his father's call. That meant only one thing. They've begun to make their move already. Relix instantly rose to his feet with that declaration. Asher is in trouble. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Looks like this is quite the long night. Chapter 225, Asher's Delegation. This is a very important mission. Asher, known for all intents and purposes as Aldered by the group he was traveling with, was currently in deep thought as he sat in the carriage. The world was currently shrouded in darkness, which meant this was the perfect moment to think. His eyes fluttered open, and then he closed then soon after, thinking of the current state of his father's company. His birthright. Right now, I have to convince the John Counselor. Each council member of the Obsidian Council had a code name attached to their real names. His father was the Blanc Obsidian member, and right now, the plan was to convince the John and Vert members respectively. Lord Vert is too far away, so we'll have to start with Lord John. Depending on how much he paced himself, they could get there in an hour. However, Asher couldn't imagine doing something like that. There's still etiquette to consider, and we can't just intrude on another's property at such an ungodly hour. As such, the eventual plan became for him to simply camp outside their territory and wait for dawn to break before proceeding any further. Yeah. That'll work. As Asher thought this, he looked outside his window and observed the two entourages that sat on their mounts and steadily moved beside him. There was also one more behind him. Adding them to the coachman, there were a total of 4 entourages, 5 individuals in total. Let's hope the delegation ends well. Even though his father Rival Blanc himself wanted to be the one to lead this delegation, it would be too risky for him to leave their main area of business. That was practically announcing vulnerability to everyone who was around. Besides, if father comes for this delegation, the other groups might think we're desperate and we might lose considerable bargaining power. In the end, this was the best thing they could do. As the carriage left the green shrubberies behind and reached the tunnel at the end of the lush greenery that surrounded them just earlier. It'll be smooth sailing from here. If Asher used his enchanted item, he could probably see the John stronghold from where he stood. We should probably set up camp here, then. Asher murmured, bringing out a pair of glasses from his pockets. Everyone halted, and Asher even came out of the carriage at this point. The journey had been a bit stressful, especially since they had to travel at nights. It wasn't something they couldn't handle, though. As the sole heir to the Carrie Blanc group, he had to make sure he was at least this capable. I better confirm the state of the John group. Asher's thoughts trailed as he looked at the enchanted item in his hand. He put on the glasses and activated its effect. The item glowed bright blue, and a shiny light surged from Asher's position. Then. Impossible. What is this? What greeted Asher's already enhanced eyes was a sight so horrible that one could practically chalk it up to a nightmare. The entire buildings within the vast compound were on fire, and he could see corpses buried in their entrails and blood. Some couldn't even be qualified as corpses, given the messed up states of their bodies. This is bad. Asher's thoughts echoed as he narrowed down his vision. He could see a few people fighting, but that was about it. It seemed like the John house desperately needed help, so if the Carrie Blanc group assisted them here, then the negotiations might go even better. Asher knew he couldn't take any chances, so he decided to rush towards the infernal flames and sea of blood that greeted his sight anytime he focused on the view. Let's not get distracted and get this over with. The darkened moon hovered him and his subordinates as they prepared to quickly save their potential allies. Amidst all the preparations and impatience that swirled within the group, a worrisome thought kept on plaguing Asher's thoughts. This could only have been done by the mercenary gang. No one else has enough power or even the nerve to try this to an Obsidian family member. I didn't think they'd stoop this low. Does that mean Sir Relix was right? Did they go to the enemy side? If so, then our plan crumbles from the start. Still, a bead of sweat fell from Asher's face as he composed himself well. I should first go to their aid and hope for the best. With his choice already made, Asher and his men parked their carriages and horses in a secure location. One of them cast a sort of protection spell, while the other made an illusion spell so that their means of transport could not be detected naturally. Once all of this was done, they proceeded towards their target. It took nearly 10 minutes to complete the distance. Even though they augmented their speeds with mana and rushed as fast as they could, it still took some time to arrive. And once they did, what greeted their sight was the bloodshed and flames that engulfed the entire compound. This is just. It felt like watching an entire empire crumble to the ground, and Asher began to wonder if the same would happen to his Carrie Blanc group one day. Never. Father will figure this out. Sir Relix is also helping out. This thought gave Asher more resolve than ever. I have to play my part too. He looked at his entourage and told them to split up and search for clues. Don't get in any unnecessary combat. Retreat when you encounter an opportunity and come back with the information you've gathered. Asher, on the other hand, chose to embrace the storm by walking straight into the entrance. He was still a delegate from the Carrie Blanc group. I better be careful. Asher was known to be considerably strong, but after what he had experienced in the past couple of days, perhaps even a week or two, he was sure he was still a novice. I'll have to take this very seriously. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Now then, we get to see Asher in a bit of action. Chapter 226, The Destroyer. HAAA. HAAA. Blood. Gore. Brutalized human meat that felt downright despicable. It felt wrong. As Asher heaved heavy sighs, his eyes occupied with the several blurs of red that danced in his eyes, he tried his best to find survivors. There were none. Everyone in the burning building had been cooked to an overwhelmingly fine degree. Some had whole bodies, and some had chopped up ones. In the end, they were made equal in death. Asher struggled to make it through the flames, thanking his enchanted cloak for the heat resistance and durability additions that it provided. If not for it, as well as his other enchanted items, he would have been cooked as well. The central manor of the John Counselor had several areas, but Asher was focused on only one. The man Lord John's office itself. There's not much use for a man who has lost his resources, but a counselor is still a counselor. With this line of thought, Asher navigated his way through the building's flames and made his way into the place. Unfortunately for this, when he arrived in Lord John's office. My God! The man's diced-up flesh was arranged to form a corpse on the wall, and flames slowly burned through it. An aroma of cooked meat filled the room, different from the choking and unbearable atmosphere outside. Once Asher saw this, he knew he had struggled for nothing. He's dead. With the counselor dead, there was no longer any need to be here. This merciless execution. It could have only been the mercenary gang. Asher's suspicions were now confirmed. Were they hired by Scylla and her forces? Have they completely gone over to their side? As Asher had these thoughts, he moved closer to the corpse, perhaps to find a clue about what had happened before his arrival. Then, I wasn't expecting any guests today. A voice appeared from behind Asher. However, the moment he turned to look, an explosion of flames rushed towards him. It felt like a floodgate had been opened, and the overwhelming burst of fire charged in his direction. Whoosh! Utilizing his passive skill and skills, he swiftly utilized wind magic to shroud himself and jump out of the building. Boom! The fragile walls broke apart like cookies, and Asher was able to escape the wrath of flames that would have melted him down to his bones. As the sparks of fire danced in the air, Asher swiftly used a wind spell to guarantee his safe landing. Gusts of wind danced around him, lessening the impact he would have on the floor as he landed safely. His eyes were on the floor above him, though where he had jumped out of. A certain man stood there, his body shrouded by flames so it was difficult to see. However, before Asher could even respond, the man jumped from his heights to the ground. Boom! The earth shattered as it welcomed his glorious landing, and his dark silhouette soon began to form the image of a man. This man. The man wore a long hooded cloak, though his hood was brought down, revealing his face. He wore no shirt, and he had black trousers under his cloak. Markings like crimson red tattoos were drawn all over his body, and his spiky red hair gave him an air of intimidation. He was well built with muscles that appeared perfectly toned. He looked like he would be a great warrior, but thanks to the magic display just now, it was clear he was also a mage. He had a few more markings on his face, marred by the maniacal grin he had on. "You know who I am, kid?" he asked, his intimidating presence burning itself into Asher's mind. Despite merely appearing to be in his 30s, the man was referring to Asher who still had the form of Aldert as a kid. Could he see through his disguise? Or was he merely looking down on him? Either way, Asher could not complain. He could only respond. "You're Anukus, the destroyer." Asher's body trembled as he watched the man's grin widen in delight. It really is him. Asher had only ever heard of him, but this was the very first time he would be seeing such a being in person. Anukus was one of the deadly three, the strongest trio among the 9 heads of destruction. He was called the Destroyer because everything about him was destruction personified. His skills, class, and even his personality, they were all geared towards consuming his prey and tearing them apart. They say he has the strength of a warrior and the skills of a mage. Asher gulped as he crouched a little. There was no need to fight him. "I apologize for intruding on your work. If you do not mind, I would like to be on my way." Asher's eyes darted to the left and right as he searched for his subordinates. Once he spotted them, he would give his signal, and they would all retreat as fast as they possibly could. "We might lose some people, but I'll make sure as many members of the group survive." The members of the Carrie Blanc group were what made up the group. Without them, the leader was nothing. That was one of the first lessons that his father taught him, and even till this moment, it remained an essential part of his life. "I do mind, though. You are right in front of me now, so why don't I simply strike you down where you are?" Anukus shrugged. It was clear that he simply desired bloodshed. "I don't want to play this card, but it seems I have no choice." Asher sighed internally. "I am an important person from the Carrie BLNC group, and Lord Blanc won't be pleased if he finds me missing or killed by the mercenary group." Anukus tilted his head, as if in slight confusion. You were contracted to eliminate the John group, so I understand that. But I do not think I was part of your execution contract. Making an independent action against me will have. You said you're from the Carrie Blanc group, right? Led by Blanc, who isn't in Scylla's new order. Right. The air suddenly grew heavy as Anokus asked the question. Asher felt like any answer he gave at the moment would be wrong. It seems you don't know yet, so let me spell it out for you, kid. The man's grin widened, and his face seemed to morph into something ugly and malevolent. There is no contract, and there is no rule or code of conduct that stops me from eliminating you. The mercenary gang had allied itself with Scylla and her new order, which means you lot are the enemy. Asher's heart began to beat rapidly. He had suspected this, but he always hoped it was just him overthinking. No. No. If that's the case, then. Once we're done with John and Vert, who do you think is next? As Anokus raised an eyebrow and grinned intensely, Asher could feel a weight rest upon him. Your side is doomed already. You already lost. As those words echoed in his ears, Asher felt his heart sink. This was indeed the worst-case scenario. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Looks like Anokus really be cooking some meat. If he reminds you of a certain character, let me know in the comments. Chapter 227, The Destroyer. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Laughter of chaos filled the air as Anokus stretched both hands out and grinned with utter malevolence. Look at your face. The despair written all over it? He beamed at Asher's shocked expression. It was comedy gold to him. Should I go a step further? Anokus could see the man before him was on the verge of breaking down, so he opened his lips to say more. I wonder if you had any relations to the 4 men that went scouting around the compound. The moment Asher heard this, his eyes widened and he looked at Anokus' face, hoping it was just a joke. But, the face he saw on the man before him said all that he needed to hear. They re dead. I butchered them up and roasted them really well. They had that particularly tender odor that only weaklings have. As Anokus went into further detail about how they screamed and writhed in pain, Asher could not help but feel disgust. Sure, he had done his fair share of interrogations. He had also been involved in torturing enemies, as it came with black market territory, but it had never been to such a despicable extent. And it wasn't like he boasted about his feat too. In the end, torturing people was merely a means to an end. He only did it because of a particular benefit that the action would bring to the Carrie Blanc group. But this monster was different. He tortures because he truly enjoys it. He's not someone I can reason with. Now that all 4 members of his entourage were gone, there was no longer any need to remain. I have to run. He had to hurry and inform his father of the terrible news that had befallen the criminal underworld. You're thinking of escaping? Don't bother. The moment you turn your back against me is the moment you die. Asher didn't think the man was joking based on his tone. Damn it. What should I do? He had tons of enchanted items, but he had his equip limit, and even if he was armed to the teeth, Asher doubted he stood a chance against someone who was famed to have killed a dragon. Is there no way to escape? Any way at a As Asher was about to complete his thought, a certain sound echoed from his trouser pocket. It was the communication device that connected directly to his father. This wasn't the agreement. Has something happened in? Swish. Before Asher could reach for the item, a slashing sound radiated through the air, and barely a second later, a large tear appeared in the location of the ringing sound. The communication device was slashed into two, now spilling out of his torn trouser pocket. It was a swift, instantaneous strike. Asher was too shocked by what had just happened to even think of moving. Just now. What if it was my throat he targeted? It would have been the end. Do you understand now? Killing someone is no fun if you can do it so easily and quickly. Anukus placed both hands in his pocket as he keenly watched Asher's trembling form. I'll admit it, kid. You're pretty strong. It's just that we're on totally different levels. Anukus wasn't wrong. Asher was a genius among humans. He was already in the max level available to those who had a C-tier class. Compared to normal humans, he was very strong, especially considering his real age. But that was where it ended. When monsters like Anukus came out of their dwelling place, it was no longer a contest of strength. This was simply a slaughter. Now that I've made it perfectly clear that I can end your life very easily if you choose to run or stand still, there's only one thing you can do to prolong your life. Asher knew it already. He wants me to fight him. You're going to have to fight, kid. Fight until you can no longer do so anymore. His wicked grin intensified. Only then will I kill you. How was this a fair deal or any kind of deal at all? Asher knew there was no chance he could beat a monster like this. However, he also didn't want to die. Is there a way that fighting him will somehow buy time for a rescue team to come? He wondered. No. It was better for him not to think down that line at all. His father would have definitely felt something was off with the way he didn't answer the call, but what then? Did they have anyone in the Carrie Blanc group that could defeat a member of the Deadly Three? Sir Relix is already occupied with transporting our goods, and there's no telling when he'll be done. Other than him, there really was no one else. Even his father, Rebel Blanc himself, while possibly being strong and smart enough to hold his own against one of the heads of destruction, could not stand a chance against the top three of the group. Anukus was just too powerful. Even if we gathered the best attack squad, it would take them too long to get here. Even if I last for hours upon hours, which I doubt that I can, they'll only come here to meet their deaths. It was all pointless. Despite all that, though, Asher had a fire burning in his eyes. I don't want to die. Not after everything. He knew it was inevitable to try and preserve his life. In the end, only the most painful demise awaited him, no matter how hard he was about to struggle. Still, I won't give up. All of Asher's skills were passive, so there really was no need to activate anything. He simply had to rely on his spells and enchanted items to live. His opponent stood before him, wearing a mask of utter amusement and deep wickedness. I won't let you have your way so easily. Crouching even more and forming fists with his hands, Asher prepared himself for the fight of his life. With this sacred word, I summon. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. I know what you want to say. I know. Ha ha ha. By the way, I know the pacing has been sucking for the past couple of chapters, so I'll try to be better in it. Cheers. Chapter 228, The Four Elementals. Asher didn't have any active skills, magic or otherwise. That was because he simply didn't need one. As someone who had extensive knowledge of magic, as well as a very fast growth in terms of levels and by extension, stats, there was no need for them. He knew the spells, and so his offensive and defensive abilities were high anyway. With, he could cast a spell in a second, and with, he could utilize any of the basic elements. His skill allowed him to analyze his opponent's magic spells or skills to a particular extent. It also boosted the abilities of his own spells. With all these factors combined, Asher had always been confident in any fight he wound up in. He had enough power and intelligence to emerge victorious. Well, none of that confidence could be seen here. Breathing raggedly, he clenched both of his fists and concentrated his mana, his eyes turning a bright green. "With this sacred word, I summon," he muttered, causing more mana to gather around him like a whirlwind. Utilizing all the cards on his side, and also thinking of how best to survive longer when fighting his opponent, this was the best Asher could come up with. Elemental Guardians. That very instant, 4 entities emerged from the excess mana that swirled around Asher's body. There was one who was bright red and orange, with traces of yellow. It was made completely out of flames, and it looked like a warrior with a flaming sword and burning armor. This sentinel took a battle stance, and the others also took their positions. There was one who resembled a gladiator made completely of earth. It had green moss covering its body, but most importantly, it was gigantic and sturdy. It had a massive shield, and if anything, it appeared designed for defense. The third one appeared to be a ghost of wind, with a swirling breeze forming a Manon archer. This archer distorted the area around him with intense winds, and it stood proud. Finally, there was one who appeared to be a priestess or perhaps a mage made out of water. It had a hood covering its face, as well as a staff. Everything was water, regardless. The flaming warrior took the vanguard position, with the earth tank right behind it and in front of Asher. The wind archer took the right flank, and the water mage took the left flank. This was the current formation that Asher chose to employ, given that his opponent was right in front of him and was a straightforward opponent. I would have liked to summon a superior water elemental, since his main element is fire, but I can't summon any that's better than this one. He could also only summon one kind of elemental at a time. At the very least, the other ones will deal some damage while she offers defensive measures against his flames. The earth tank was meant to absorb the damage done by his enemies' slashes, and the archer was meant to deal ranged damage while the flame warrior would directly fight. Currently, this is the best measure to take. It consumed a lot of mana, sure, but Asher was confident that he could recoup enough for another elemental summon if they bought him enough time. I'll just maintain a safe distance and attack him with all of them. In case they need support, I might also need to pitch in. He could act as a second water mage, hence making it a battle of 5 against 1. The odds seem to be in my favor, but that's ignoring who this man is. A head of sweat fell from Asher's forehead as he watched the Mananukus, the destroyer, remove his cloak. His bare, well-toned body embraced the darkness of the night, and the sparks of flames all around him served to highlight his immaculate form. He looks like an expert combatant, so I can't let him get too close. Asher narrowed his eyes and took in a deep breath. Come. Anukus yelled, stretching out his hands as if being a careless man driven into insanity. As you wish. Whoosh. In one swift move, the flame warrior rushed forward, sweeping past the barrier of distance that separated it from the enemy. Its flaming body danced as it raised its blade and prepared a heavy frontal assault. As it did this, the wind archer slid a little further down the flank where it guarded, already aiming at the adversary. The water mage already had a blast of water prepared in case of a flame spell from the enemy, and the giant orb of water only kept growing bigger. As for the earth tank, it protected Asher with its bulky form and sturdy shield. All of this happened within a moment, and by the time most of the new formation had been settled, the flaming warrior was already in front of the enemy. Swoosh! The first strike of both sharpness and intense heat radiated forth. It would have burned the foe before finally cutting through their body like a hot knife through butter. However, this strike did not connect. The man named Anukus easily evaded the strike and appeared behind the flame warrior. Asher, like one playing an intricate game of chess, controlled his puppets to strike from the distance. Phew! Wind arrows whistled through the arrow, but Anukus easily evaded every one as well, twisting his body in a wild dance of expert combativeness. As he did this, though, the flame warrior that he earlier evaded was right behind him with a heavier strike. Boom! The earth split, and fire erupted from it as the warrior's sword missed its target. Anukus was right beside the blade, wearing a bright grin on his face. As the flame warrior made to raise its blade to strike the enemy, combining its combat ability with the wind arrows that were on their way, Anukus cackled silently. His brightly glowing crimson eyes showed something malevolent within. All right. A wicked tone erupted from his whisper. Let's get a bit more serious. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Hope you enjoyed the chapter. I know you're all waiting for it to end and for Asher to die. Your wish just might be granted. Chapter 229, The Power of Anukus. Whoosh! The flaming blade resonated with the arrows of wind, causing a roaring tempest to be born. Slashes of fire rose to form a torrent of whirlwind as the arrows burst in a wind vortex. The result was a surrounding flame-wind combination that engulfed the enemy. The whirlwind of flames ascended high, completely shrouding Anukus within its heated embrace. Slashes of winds would continuously tear through the target as fire turned them into hot crisps. Surely, no one could survive that. Phew! The flaming torrent was dispersed instantly, turning into mere sparkling embers within a second. And standing within it all was Anukus, with a hand raised up and an insane expression on his face. Asher could see it, and he didn't like the sense of foreboding that coursed through his mind. His brain quickly worked up a solution, but before he could think of one, something bright was glowing from Anukus' hand. It resembled flames. Boom! The intense fire wave was sent towards the flame warrior, consuming it in fire far more intense than what it was composed of. He. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Anukus gave the flaming warrior all of its attention, as more flames roared from his second hand, all rushing past the warrior's body. One would think that a flame elemental wouldn't be affected by fire attacks, but that wasn't true at all. A lesser flame elemental would definitely be affected by the flame attacks of higher intensity. It was almost like being involved in a fist fight. Flesh hitting flesh. Only the superior kind of flesh with better muscles and sturdiness would emerge the winner. So also was the case here. The fire warrior was already slowly vanishing as a result of the raging fires that bathed its body. It couldn't even move. Guh! Attack! Asher grew so desperate that he yelled despite not needing to. He was talking to his water mage, who had managed to generate a large ball of water for situations like this. Whoosh! She launched her water ball at the enemy, and it moved quickly for its size. In no time at all, it would traverse the distance and reach the enemy. But Boom! A wall of fire suddenly rose from the ground to stop the giant ball of water. And Believe it or not, the flames and water were evenly matched in strength. And no way. I've been preparing that water ball for some time now. Despite all that, it couldn't get a single barrier that had just been formed. It was absurd to Asher. Shoo-yoo-yoo. In the end, both clashes ended in steam rushing from their point of impact, filling the area with its white cloud. The steam's influence did not last very long, though, as the explosion from the distance cleared everything up in a flash. The area's steam parted as the pressure of heat and wind sent everything dissipating, paving the way for an image of destruction itself. Ah! Asher's eyes nearly bulged as he looked before him. The flame warrior that he had spent so much mana to create was in shambles, its dying embers fading away. That was 1 out of 4. Anukus, whose back was facing Asher, slowly turned his head and looked behind him. He had a cold, completely imposing expression on his face as his eyes glowed brighter crimson. Next, he said. Shivers covered Asher's body, and he began to slowly panic. He commanded the water mage to prepare another round of its water ball, but right before it could do so, a bright pillar of flames rushed from beneath it. The swirling flames consumed the water mage in no time, not even leaving a single moisture left in the immediate atmosphere. The wind archer that was now targeting Anukus from a blind spot shot a very intense wind arrow at him, one that was strong enough to shatter the earth itself. However, weak. The wind itself tore to pieces, slashed by an invisible blade that none could see. Before the wind archer could flee from its compromised position, or even react to the shocking defeat of its strongest arrow. Sever. It too was ripped into shreds. The very personification of wind, sliced into pieces beyond recovery, soon died out as it faded away into obscurity. In the end, Anukus stood alone in a field of devastation, watched only by Asher and the earth tank that was meant to defend him. Now then. Shall we continue? Anukus began to move from his position, every step of his seemingly causing a quake in the ground. His maniacal grin returned as he watched Asher tremble from where he stood. The man was absolutely terrified, and for good reason. Before Asher could even think of a next plan of action, Anukus was already standing in front of the earth tank. The massive elemental made to charge at Anukus using its sturdy shield, but before it could make any meaningful movements, Anukus was right behind it. And then, the earth tank crumbled on the ground, turned into nothing but blocks of rock. Its sturdy shield had been broken to pieces before it even realized it, and its body followed not long after, yet another effortless display of power by the one known as Anukus. It's just you now. Got any other way to entertain me? Asher was speechless. I haven't recovered enough mana yet. He had thought his elementals would be able to buy him enough time. He had even been generous about the time by placing his estimation to the lowest possible time possible. Still, this was unexpected. I barely have enough to summon one elemental, and even then, what good would that do? His enemy was strong. Overwhelmingly strong. Too strong. The reason he chose the elemental strategy was to create a variation of attack patterns in order to see which would be more effective. This would allow him to learn more about his opponent while also keeping his distance and preserving his life. But, it turned out all of that was pointless. There was no weakness to exploit here. There was no attack pattern to be studied either. There was only Anukus. And the chaos that he wrought with his power. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Chapter 230, The Intrusion. Is this really the way it ends? I can't do anything more than this. As the unfair truth rubbed itself in Asher's face, he felt the invincible being pull closer. He could already smell the sulfur and smoke, and the heat itched his skin. This was truly the end. Who's that? Or not? Anuku stopped before he reached Asher, his gaze focused on something in the distance behind the crouching man. Yeah? What's happening? Before Asher could realize what was going on, he suddenly felt himself being pulled into something strange. It felt like the world had become a blur, and everything became blurry, until a second later it was back to normal. He noticed that, somehow, Anuku's was further away from him than before. They had been mere inches apart before, but now it was more like 70 to 100 meters. What happened? How did this? I don't understand. Asher was still very confused when he felt a hand rub his disheveled hair. A familiar presence suddenly washed over him as he took his eyes off the nightmare that was Anuku's and looked up. Sir Relix. The dark, intimidating mask and his glowing crimson eyes seemed to bring nothing but solace to the Asher. Never before had he felt safer. I came as fast as I could. I hope I'm not too late. Relix said, his eyes on Asher. The young man in an older fellow's body shook his head profusely. And no. Not at all. Thank you for coming, Sir Relix. Somehow, the fear that had pervaded his body slowly became non-existent. It was soon replaced with a bright ray of hope. Good. Stay by my side, then. This will soon be over. Relix and his confident tone did not at all surprise Asher. It didn't come off as condescending as well. To Asher, the only one who could defeat the enemy who stood before them was Relix. If he couldn't do it, then all hope was practically lost. He uses slash and flame attacks. Asher said, doing his best to relay whatever information he had managed to collect in his fight. It wasn't much, but he hoped it would be useful to his savior. I can see that. That was the response Relix gave. It almost felt like he was grinning in amusement, causing Asher to laugh awkwardly. Okay. Asher slowly moved a little closer to Relix, since he was already beside him. The two stared at each other for a second more before the voice of their enemy echoed forth. What's this? Am I being ignored here? The both of you sure have some nerve. As Anuku's voice reverberated in the air, Asher felt his skin tingle. During their brief interaction, he had been trained to fear this man, even his voice. However, before he could give in any deeper to his fears, he heard Relix's reassuring voice. There's no reason to fear. As Asher heard this, he felt his heart grow lighter, and the shaking in his body ceased. He gazed up, in both admiration and surprise, at the man who had come to save him. I never lose. With those words replaying in his ears, Asher smiled, nodded, and looked away. Thank you, Sir Relix. He returned his gaze to Anuku's, a confident smile now on his face. He was no longer afraid to give a confident grin in the face of such an overwhelming foe. Why would he be? There was an even more frightening being that was his ally. That was enough to make Asher smile. He killed all my men and our supposed allies. Please don't end it too quickly. Asher knew he was being a little impudent, but he hoped the man beside him would listen to his heartfelt request. Please let him suffer a little, Sir Relix. Asher felt Relix's gaze leave him and turn in the direction of the man who stood a distance from them. Fine. Relix's powerful voice caused the air to vibrate. Let's have him beg for death. What's with these people and suffering? Ray thought to himself, nearly sighing. He knew full well that Asher also tortured his enemies, and now the guy in front of him was also guilty of the same. At this point, Ray was sick of underworld business. I can see the justification for this, though. It seems this guy had done quite a lot of awful things. Ray knew Asher and his father, the entire Carrie Blanc group, had done a lot of terrible things too, so they weren't really meant to judge. However, a critical factor made this particular one unforgivable. This guy messed with the plan. He went and killed the people we're supposed to be allied with, and even eliminated people from our side. To Ray, that was more than enough of a reason to enact some form of vengeance on him. Ray took a glance at the man's status window that was still beside him and smiled. Name Anukus. Race human. Class heretic. Level 145. Life force, 15. Mana level, 100. Combat ability, 30. Stat points, 0. Skills. Alignment chaotic evil. One of the deadly three, the three strongest executives of the mercenary gang. He is known as the Destroyer due to his immense destructive capabilities and his unstable personality. Interesting. He smiled. It was amazing how a person could have only 3 skills, yet be considered very formidable due to how well they used them. I guess it's all about quality and less about quantity. Ray preferred to have both, though. It's a good thing I snagged his skills a while back. The honest truth was that Ray had arrived a few moments earlier, right when Anukus had destroyed the flame elemental. He watched as the man proceeded to wreck all of the other elementals and then nearly kill Asher. Of course, he wasn't going to let Asher die, so he saved him right in the nick of time. From the looks of things, he made the right call, seeing as Asher now looked immensely grateful to him. Looks like my points with him have gone up. It was thanks to his patience that Ray was able to witness a display of power from both Asher and Anukus. The result: SS tier, 3. S tier, 8. A tier, 8. B tier, 12. C tier, 3. D tier, intimidating aura. C tier, warrior's mantle. C tier, rampage. C tier, damage nullification. B tier, carnage. C tier, great protection cloak. C tier, superior self. C tier, true detection. C tier, bloodlust. B tier, greater blood magic. B tier, greater fire magic. B tier, sever. C tier, homing. C tier, elemental summoning. C tier, elemental summoning. C tier, elemental summoning. C tier, elemental summoning. HAAA. Ray sighed a little while giving himself a wry smile. Looks like I'll eventually need to sort out all these new skills. It wasn't long ago that he had just 34 skills, and now he had a lot more. It's a good thing I have now. If that wasn't the case, he would have to start throwing away some of skills at this point. Enough about that, though. Ray shrugged aside his thoughts and chose to observe his opponent instead. He doesn't look too happy. I wonder why. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Looks like we're about to have a third executive match consecutively. These guys just keep popping out.